I joined you all for the meditation, and I could feel the magnetism in this group. Hriman, whom I know has come there several times, always talks in glowing terms about the satsang you all have there. So I'm very grateful to be part of this group this morning, and thank you, Supriya and Maitri and Mark and all the others that made this possible for me. I don't know if I have anything else to add than what Maitri said about me, but just a little bit of my background. I am originally from India, as you can probably tell, but I've been serving here at the Seattle community for about the past 20 years. I had the yoga program here. I'm a light bearer. And this is basically what I do. It's like all of you, serving master is my calling. So I wanted to talk a little bit today, and we'll open for Q&A after that, about this week's topic, which is, who is this Son of Man? Jesus refers to himself in the Bible sometimes as the Son of Man and sometimes as the Son of God. And in fact, there is one famous episode. This is during his Galilean ministry, when he's going around in the area of Galilee and conducting his public ministry. One evening, he calls his disciples together and says, "Who do people say that I, Son of Man, am?" He wants to know how people perceive him. And the disciples chime in. They say, some say that you're John the Baptist, some say you're the prophet Elijah, and some say you're one of the other prophets, and so on. And Jesus cuts to the chase, and he says, "Who do you think I am?" And Simon Peter, who is always very attuned to his master in such things, he jumps up right away and says, "You're the Son of God." And Jesus is very happy, and he says very famously that you will be the rock upon which my church will be built. And Paramahansa Yogananda explained this. He said that when Jesus referred to himself as Son of Man, he was referring to his fleshly, corporeal, human, impermanent form, which was bound by ego and filled with the sense of I-ness. And when he referred to himself as the Son of God, he was referring to his soul, which was eternally free in God. And the whole purpose of that little talk he had with his disciples was to emphasize to them the importance of perceiving beyond the physical form and seeing. They wouldn't know who Jesus was until they perceived that he was the Christ. Now, when souls become fully free in God, the masters tell us that some of them, God picks them and sends them back to earth to free other souls. And so these souls who voluntarily give up their freedom in God and come to earth to assume the humiliation and suffering of the physical form, they are known as avatars. And each avatar has a specific mission, a specific thing that they are ordained by God to do. They are given a task. Krishna was one such avatar, Buddha was one such avatar, and Jesus was another one, and the masters on our path and many others, they are avatars. And so on this day, Palm Sunday, when Jesus enters the gates of Jerusalem, he knows what is going to happen because avatars come in knowing full well what God's plan is for them. So he knows what's going to happen. He's greeted with great adulation. People are singing Hosanna, and they are welcoming him as the king. They say, "Thank you for coming. We love you. We know you're here to transform our lives in a good way." And through it all, Jesus is completely centered. He's unmoving. He knows the will of his Father, and he's only tuned into that. 5 days later, when he's crucified amidst common criminals and endures untold suffering, was wearing the crown of thorns and so on. And the same people that expressed adulation for him are now despising him, pelting him with stones. He is centered. He's unmoved. He knows the will of his Father. He's able to do this because he's constantly tuned into the Christ consciousness. He's Jesus, the Christ, the expanded Christ consciousness, the place beyond all duality. Fully opened into that, he's able to always know the will of his Father and stay unmoved by the ups and downs of what is happening around him. So what is this Christ consciousness? Yogananda explained it that the Supreme Spirit, the God beyond all creation, which is known in the Vedantic teachings as Satchidananda Brahma. It's Brahma, and Brahma is the name for the expansive principle, which is another definition of God, that which expands, that which it's the opposite of being drawn into itself. It expands everywhere. That's Brahman. Its nature is Satchidananda, ever existing, ever new, infinite bliss. Yogananda says that it had the desireless desire to enjoy itself through multiple forms, and therefore it set a portion of its consciousness vibrating. The still, eternal bliss set a portion of its consciousness into up and down, back and forth. So out of one came duality. And everything, protons, planets, plants, galaxies, light, animals, man, woman, all exist in the duality of that vibration. But to these two, the eternal spirit and the vibration, which is the holy sound of Om, the Holy Ghost, the eternal impartial witness of the Bible, to that he added a third component, seeding the salvation of all creation. It was a reflection of his spirit, the vibrationless reflection of his spirit within every atom of creation. This vibrationless stillness is what holds vibratory creation together. It's like the hinge on a door frame against which the door moves. Without that door frame and the hinge, the door would literally fly off the handle. So it is the stillness at the heart of creation that holds creation together. And by tuning into that stillness, it's the gateway to emancipation for all vibratory creation. The Vedantic texts call this as Kutastha Chaitanya. Kuta means meeting point. Any place where things to get together is called Kuta. It's the meeting point of Ida, the left side of the spine, Pingala, the right side of the spine, and Sushumna, the central spine. So the dualities within us come together in Kuta. Kutastha, stha means present at the meeting point. So when at the place where duality comes together, what exists is the reflection of spirit, vibrationless, Kutastha Chaitanya. And Yogananda called this the Christ consciousness. That's why in meditation, we always lift our gaze. That's why, as Maitri led so wonderfully this morning with the chakra meditation, we go up and eventually end up here. You see, the life of Christ is also indicative, symbolic of the lives that we lead. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that Christ on this day, Palm Sunday, he enters Jerusalem. There is all this adulation around him. Yet he walks through like an aura of light, completely unmoved by all of that. He's still radiating peace, radiating healing, harmony. Stories are told of the last week of Christ, of all the things that happened by a mere touch of his robe. Movies have been made on that. And the same Christ, 5 days later, crucified, bearing a cross, walking to Calvary, where he's crucified, yet like an aura of light, completely untouched by all of this. Our minds are like that. They're exactly like that. One day, we say, we love what is going on with my life. There is adulation. She's singing Hosanna. This is so wonderful. The next day, we hate what is going on. The following day, we feel betrayed by what's going on. The following day, we feel like we are put on trial for things that we didn't do. Then we feel the trials are so great that we are crucified. So the mind is saying, I hate this. I love this. Goes through ups and downs. But there is a part of us that's unmoved by all of this. There is that stillness within us, which is capable by its very presence to provide enormous guidance. So the question is, how do we get tuned into the Christ consciousness within us, into the stillness within us? Well, the obvious ways are, of course, sadhana that we did this morning so wonderfully, our meditation, seva, service, and satsanga, gatherings like this. Because we already know, just like Jesus' life was preordained, he knew at all moments where his life was going. We too know that, especially those of us on the spiritual path. You're here, we hear the words of Master, we hear the words of Swami, we attend a Sunday service, and you are identifying with it. You say, that's me. I am a child of light. And you fully see yourself on that path. And then we go back, and there is the waves of likes and dislikes. And sometimes we miss, oh, I'm too busy to meditate right now. I'm too busy to attend a satsang. Bad things are happening to me in life. Let me come back later once this crisis passes. And 5 years later, like, oh, where did that go? Let me go back. This way, an entire lifetime, many lifetimes goes away. So how do we stay in tune with that stillness? So Yogananda said something very interesting. This, I didn't expect this when I read this. He said that when you're confronted with a situation that you really hate, it applies to likes as well, but when things are going really well, nobody says, why is this happening to me? We're just enjoying it. It's only when things are not going well. So he said, when you're confronted with life's bad situations, carefully examine the words that your mind uses to describe that situation. What is the inner narrative? How is that situation being perceived? So when you examine that, it's very interesting. Usually the words that we use fall into 3 categories. The first one says, why did this happen to me? I'm not responsible. The second one says, I have done all kinds of good works. I have taken responsibility for this life. Life is so unfair. Maybe I'm a sinner. And the third one says, doesn't matter, I accept whatever is happening to me. I will fight it. I'll fight to change it anyway. These are 3 states of consciousness, and this might happen. This might change from minute to minute, situation to situation. And they each have a different vibratory level that either takes us towards Christ consciousness or away from it. So let's look at the first one. It's victimhood. It says, why did this happen to me? This is so unfair. I am not responsible for this. Somebody else did this. They are to blame. Maybe it's the weather, it's the global warming, maybe it's pollution, whatever, doesn't matter. I'm not responsible. And the flip side of it is, I don't want to do anything about this. So that shirking responsibility, victimhood, laziness, Yogananda said, they're all indicative of the same thing. It's the darkening pull of separateness, that I do what I do and things need to happen to me, this entire self-absorption. And he said, that's bad. That is the farthest one can be from Christ consciousness. It leads to nowhere good. And you know what he said? Action clarifies. When you find yourself in that kind of a mood, do something right away. he went so far as to say in one of his writings that even if it's a bad thing, doesn't matter. It's much better to do something bad than to not do anything at all. Passiveness, passive, the worst thing that one can do on the spiritual path. The Bhagavad Gita, there is a very famous verse, I'll say that in Sanskrit, is Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachina ma karma phala hetur bhur mate sangostva karmani. I'll explain the entire verse as we go along, but let me focus on the last part. Mate sangostva karmani. Sangha means attachment. Akarma means inaction. Krishna says, sangostva karmani, don't be attached to inaction. It's lethal. It won't take you anywhere. And it is an attachment. It's an actual downward pull towards not doing anything. So the victimhood, farthest away from Christ consciousness. So that narrative, when we sense that when we sense those words to describe a situation, do something, Yogananda says, anything, doesn't matter. Get up and start moving. The second one is more of a transactional consciousness. It says, it's my responsibility. I bear responsibility for my life. I will do good things. And as long as I do good things will happen to me. And this is a higher state of consciousness. It's very hard to be in this state all the time, to refer everything back to what I have done in the past and maintaining equanimity through it is very hard to do. So transactional consciousness, we've already quite ahead, but that too has an issue because karma is very subtle. It's really not this simple. Swamiji used a wonderful metaphor to describe it. He said, every time we act or think, it creates a half a circle. That's the half of karma. The other half comes back at some point. We don't know when. So what's come back to us now, either good or bad, the first half circle for that may have happened yesterday, 10 years ago, 10 lifetimes ago, 10,000 lifetimes ago. We don't know. So approaching life transactionally, saying, I will do good works, is bound to lead to disappointment. It will eventually say, life is so unfair. Why do bad things happen to good people? There's a disciple of Yogananda. And, just like all of us, he was trying to lead a very spiritual life. And he followed all the guidelines, sadhana, seva, satsanga, devotion. But he had great physical problems once in his life, and he couldn't understand why. So he went to his spiritual advisor, who was one of the most advanced disciples of Master. And so he told her the situation. I really resent what is happening. And she said something very profound. She said, when we resent what is happening to us, we don't pay up the karma because we close the door to the learning that needs to be had from it so that we can overcome that karma. So the transactional consciousness eventually leads to some form of resentment of what happens to us. So for this, Yogananda said, Krishna said, and Swami's written about it, it begins with acceptance. They say, whatever's happening to me, I will accept it. And it's called Nishkama Karma, that verse from the Bhagavad Gita that I quoted, action without expecting the fruits of that action. Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachina. Karma means action. Karmani iva. Iva means only. Adhikara. Adhikara means entitlement or duty. Your only duty is to act, meaning do the best of what is in front of you. Ma phaleshu kadachina. Phala means fruit. The fruits of what you have done are not in your control. It's referring to this arc of karma. Who knows when it's happened? Don't pretend to understand it. Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachina. Ma karma phala hetur bhu. Ma karma phala hetur bhu. It's a complex Sanskrit compound. But simply translated, it means don't pretend to find the causes of what's happening. Hetu cause. Ma karma phala hetu. Don't pretend to find the causes and don't use it as an excuse to not act. Samgostva karmani. Don't be attached to inaction because of this. So transactional consciousness can be overcome by acceptance and nishkama karma, the sense of doership. This is closer to Christ consciousness. But that's still not enough. Because at this point, one is in a very high state. The words that we use to describe this are things like never accept or identify with defeat. Within me lies the energy to accomplish all that I will to do. I will not yield. It's the kind of mentality that says that I will radiate love and goodwill to everybody and light, regardless of what is happening in my life. These are the kinds of people about whom books are written. They are leaders, they are inspiring people, they are warriors. They have accepted, they take responsibility for life and face it head on. But that too is not enough. This is wonderful, but that too is not enough. There's a wonderful episode in the Mahabharata, which many of you have heard of. It's the longest epic in the world and describes primarily an apocalyptic, catastrophic, monumental battle between cousins for a kingdom. And there is, as always, there is in such battles, there are good people and bad people. And the leader of the good side is a warrior named Arjuna. He embodies everything that I just said. He's the greatest warrior of his age. He faces every situation head on. And there is not even a iota of fear within him. The leader of the bad side is a man named Duryodhana. He too is very determined. He can change the situation in front of him by his willpower alone. They are extraordinary warriors in life. And they have amassed a great army. Each of them has amassed a great army. Duryodhana, the bad guy, his army is bigger. But there is one man in the world who can make a difference, who can still tilt the scales of power to one side or the other. His name is Krishna. And Krishna is perhaps a warrior even greater than Arjuna. He has a large army which can make a difference. But he's also God in human form. He's an avatar. So both Arjuna and Duryodhana go to him because they want him to fight on their side. And at that point, Krishna is sleeping. And so Arjuna, who is humble by nature, he's at the foot of Krishna's bed, just waiting for him to awake. Duryodhana, who is prideful by nature, he goes, folds his arms and stands at the head of Krishna's bed very indignantly. How dare you sleep? And so Krishna presently wakes up. And, when you wake up, what do you see? You see whomever's at the foot of your bed. So he says, Arjuna, what a great surprise this is. You've just made my day. Then behind him, Duryodhana is saying, and Krishna looks up, oh, Duryodhana, you're here too. Then my day just got even better. What can I do for the two of you? And they explain the situation to him. And you've got to take sides, they say. Krishna says, I can't, because both of you are to me. However, I'll give you a choice. One of you can have my armies, all the great fighting force that I have, which is known worldwide. The second one of you can have me, but I'll not fight. Even though I can personally make a difference in this war, I'll not fight. What would you like to choose? And since Arjuna, I saw you first, the leader of the good guys, I saw you first, you can choose. And Duryodhana is saying, oh, what a folly I committed. I should have stood at the foot of the bed, nudged him aside, so he'll choose me first because I want his army. And Arjuna says, Lord, where you are, there is dharma, righteousness. And where there is dharma, there is victory. So even though you won't fight, I'll choose you. Duryodhana is thinking, what a moron. Thank God I would have chosen the army. So he says, Krishna, I'll have the army. And needless to say, in the catastrophic 18-day war that follows, the bad guys, Duryodhana's side, are not only defeated, but decimated, completely massacred. Arjuna's side wins, And at all times during this great battle between good and evil, it's Krishna's guidance, not his actual involvement, but his guidance was what made the difference. You see, that's what's missing. It's not enough to be a warrior. St. John of the Cross, he said, live in this world as if only you and God exist. So what he meant by that was, yes, of course there are other people, but whatever they do, whatever happens to you as a result of their actions or universe's actions, see that as God trying to lift you up. So the warrior asks, how can I change what is happening? The spiritual warrior, who sees God in everything, asks, not only how can I change this, he says, God, why is this a blessing for me? Why should I celebrate this? That's when we expand into Christ consciousness. One can imagine Jesus, the Christ, walking through these days of the Holy Week, saying, Lord, what is your will in this? What should I do? And so he was completely centered, walking through, spreading blessings, even through his trials. So that is the lesson of Palm Sunday for us, is to live as if only us, each of us and God existed, and be a spiritual warrior. So let me finish with a reading from Whispers from Eternity. I vow never again to turn my gaze from thee. I take this sacred vow. Never will I lower my love's gaze below the eyebrow horizon of my constant thoughts of thee. Never will I turn my uplifted inner sight away from thee. Never will I let my mind dwell on anything that reminds me not of thee. I will disdain the nightmare of ignorant behavior. I will court all dreams of noble achievement, those of love, kindness, and understanding, for they are thy dreams. Though I dream many dreams, wakefully I will ever think of thee, in the sacred fire of constant remembrance, kept ever alight on my soul's altar. I will ever behold thy presence with the watchful eyes of devotional love. Thy grace has shown me the dualities of health and sickness, life and death, joy and sorrow are but passing fantasies. I am finished with those eternally self-canceling delusions. I am persuaded at last that there is but one abiding reality, the eternal, ever-conscious, ever-new, ever-thrilling, infinite bliss. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Amen.
Thank you so much. That was such an inspiring talk. I really, really enjoyed it. And so now what we are going to do is we are going to invite everybody to participate, those that want to, in our Q&A about the topic, about your talk, or anything else that they feel to ask. And we will be going off of Facebook. We've been on Facebook. We'll invite our Facebook friends, if they want to join us, to go onto our website and get the link, the Zoom link there, and come in through Zoom. So we'll come off of Facebook now, and then we'll open it up for Q&A and invite everybody to open up their cameras and wave and say hi and ask some questions. We've got this special guest here we've never had before, and this wonderful talk, so thank you again.
I want to just say thank you for the words of inspiration, most especially for me, for the words of St. John of the Cross. He is someone that I was recommended to read before I came onto this path by my spiritual advisor back then, over 30 years ago. And of course I understood nothing. he was such a deep, deep soul. I'm sure I got something by the grace of God, but it's only since I've come onto this path that I've begun to even understand what those deep ones, St. John of the Cross said, St. Teresa of Avila, and those ones that I was reading before I came on this path. But Master Yoganandaji has really helped those deep words. And when I heard you say that, to live only as if God and I exist in this world together, that to me is not exclusive, it's very inclusive. But the attitude to live as only as if it is God and me as one guiding everything in this world, then and only then I feel can we embrace all that truly is. So thank you for bringing up St. John of the Cross. Very special for me.
Welcome, Sophia. You know that, as you know, and it's probably a good thing to share with everybody else, that quote that I just said has a second part to it, which is actually very, very yogic. So let me read the second part. I'll read the whole thing. He said, live in this world as if only you and God exist. The second part, very inspiring, he says, then your heart will never be made captive by any earthly thing. Is that interesting? Wow. Yeah, it goes right on. There is a Yoga Sutra that says exactly the same thing. It says, Tato dvandva nabhigataha, and therefore you are not struck by opposites. Your heart will never be made captive by any earthly thing. So St. John of the Cross, this is the gift that Yogananda brought to us, that he fleshed out the inner yogic message in mystics and saints from across the world, kind of reinforcing how universal these teachings are. So thank you for sharing that, Sophia.
All right. Anybody else have any comments or questions? And you can also put them in the chat box. I don't know if there is. Have you checked the chat to see if there's anything?
Chat's open. So
Hello. I have a question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering why we don't all live like that. How come we don't all just do pranayama all the time and just live a God-centered life? How come we have to live in duality? How come we continue to choose duality?
Isn't that the $1,000 question or $1 million question, Alex? Well, where do I begin? I'll tell you. Let me. There's a beautiful story in India that's often told. It goes something like this. There's Brahma, the creator. And Brahma was tasked by God to create. So, he made heaven and earth and light and this and that, and he made human beings. And then the moment he created human beings, they went right into meditation and merged back in God. So the creation didn't stick. There was nothing to they did exactly what Alex said. They did pranayama and went right back. And so Brahma, the devious guy that he is, he did something else. He created Maya. He created an active, outward pulling force. See, the job of pranayama is to bring the energy back in, make it ascend the spiral stairway. We follow the vibration of Om in the reverse direction, not towards creation, but towards God. But so the Creator, in his infinite wisdom, we don't know why, created an active outward pulling force. So the next time we feel resistance to, this is an example I always like to give. I like chocolate, so many of my metaphors are centered around chocolate. If a very young baby who's never had chocolate before, assuming it's old enough, you feed the baby chocolate, it loves it. And for the rest of its life, knows that chocolate's a good thing and takes every single opportunity to eat chocolate. Isn't that true? That's true for everybody. On the other hand, I'm willing to guess that all of us, we've meditated And we know every single time it's a great thing, very enjoyable. Yet, unlike chocolate, there is an active resistance to meditation. Part of it is discipline. Part of it is karma, but most of it is this active outward magnetism that makes creation stick, endure. So the short answer to your question is, Alex, that there is an outward magnetism that persuades us to not do things that are good for us and do things that are actively bad for us. So this is why this notion of surrender, inviting God, again, St. John of the Cross, his words are, by the way to overcome this influence, and in the Christian tradition, it's called Satan. In the Vedantic tradition, it's Maya, individualized. It becomes ignorance, whatever you want to call it, Satan, Maya, ignorance, avidya, doesn't matter. That it is an active kundalini, they're all in an active outward, downward pull. And the way to counteract it is to live in this world as if only you and God existed. So you see what I'm saying? So it's a very profound answer. I wish I could give you it's a very profound question, and I wish I could give you a slightly, I don't know what the term is, better or easier answer, but that's the way it is. And there is this pull, and we got to work against that, invite God into our lives. You go ahead.
Hello, Murali. Thank you for being here with us in North Texas. What a blessing. I have a short answer. You were saying that it just popped into my head. It's just easier. Downward pulling is just easy. You don't have to do anything. You just sit around and it all happens. It goes down as if like by gravity. It's so much harder to make the decision and go sit in your meditation cushion and do all your techniques and practices. I can't help but laugh at that. But then once we're doing them, of course, there's nothing greater. And once you start achieving even a little bliss, you become addicted to it, and you begin to think, how can I possibly have chosen the other thing, or how could I have let it happen? But anyway, what my question was that I would like for you, given all you know in Sanskrit and Vedanta, I would like a bit of an explanation of the differentiation between Brahma and Brahman, because they seem to be used interchangeably. And I myself, the very few phrases that I remember that are just dear to my heart, like one of them, I am Atma Brahma, the self is Brahma. And then, the one that you mentioned and Master mentions all the time, Satchidananda Brahman. But then there's, say, in Master's work, God talks with Arjuna, cosmic Mother Nature, where is the mother of all vibrations and has the three phases, right? The creative, preservative, dissolving states governed by Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. And so at some point I get confused, the Brahma, Brahman, is there like a very good definition to set them aside, or they really are traditionally used interchangeably?
Well, what a simple question. So let me answer it in a very complex way. I'm being tongue-in-cheek. There is no easy answer to that. Let me see. So tell you a little bit of Sanskrit first. Brahma is the root word, or Brahman is the root word, and it simply means that which expands. And when Brahman, the principle of expansion, becomes the subject, the cause, it becomes Brahma. That's how Sanskrit works. That some masculine roots end with a N, and when they become the subject, they have a type of ending. So that's just basic Sanskrit. So when you hear the word Brahma, you talk about Brahma being the subject of something, creating, causing something. And therefore, the creator, the responsibility of the creator has the word Brahma. The concept of the expansive principle, meaning the principle beyond creation, God the Father is Brahman. Okay, so that's probably the simplest way of thinking about it. My advice is, doesn't matter what word you give it, think of God the Father, not so much the creative principle. So the word Brahma that's why in the Indian tradition, there are no temples to Brahma. That's not, delusive creation is not worthy of worship. So we just go back to Brahman. So again, that's the simplest answer I can give. If you're interested more, there's a book that Swami wrote. It's called Hindu Way of Awakening, and there's an entire chapter on this. Actually, there are 2 chapters on this. So take a look.
I was curious about, you talked about the 3 ways of approaching, or the 3 consciousness, whenever we're forms of consciousness that we're presented with the problem. And I wonder if there's
states of consciousness.
Yeah, if there's a relationship between that and the types of consciousness that we often hear, Brahman, Kshatriya, I forget the Sanskrit names of the lower 2, but the emergent consciousness and the...
Very, very, very perceptive. In fact, not just a relationship, they are exactly that the states of consciousness of Shudra, victimhood, and Vaishya, transactional, Kshatriya, to Brahman, the one who walks with God. So that's exactly what those are.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, very, very perceptive. Great question.
Anybody else? Let's see who else.
Can I ask another question? I was just wondering about like you guys had talked about Sanskrit. Is there a relation between the nada and the nadis of the subtle energy channels? Like there's the nada is like the resonance or the sound, and then the nadi are like the points in the body that can open and close.
No, they're 2 different roots, 2 different words. They just happen to sound very similar.
Okay. Anybody else? It's been such a wonderful gathering. Surely there's more questions.
I have a question. Hi, good morning. Thank you, Murali, for being with us today. I had a question based on what I read about your bio on our Ananda Dallas website, which was about you've done a lot of exploration about yoga and things like to do with health, such as diabetes and other kinds of health conditions, metabolic conditions. I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about that.
That's quite a switch of subjects. I'll try my best.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. So I'm an active researcher in that field. The things. See, the question people have been asking is, why is yoga so effective? And when I say yoga now, eventually, of course, I mean yoga in the fullest definition of it, the way we understand. But also, I'm mostly speaking about the usual understanding of it, which is the yoga poses and the pranayama and mantras and so on. Let's just limit ourselves to those 3, asanas, pranayamas, and mantras. And a little bit of meditation. This combination seems to be unusually effective. And on the one hand, it's good for people dealing with the inflammation of chemotherapy among cancer patients. It's good for homeostatic diseases, like anything from diabetes or any other endocrinological diseases, adrenal overdrive, a lot of cortisol, inflammation caused due to obesity, and keeping the back pain away, helping you sleep better, reducing the incidence of PTSD, and on and on. These are all, everything I cite is where there is actual research on this. Question is, why is yoga so effective? It's a very, people are beginning to ask that question in the last 8 years. And one of the active areas of research, it goes something like this. I can't expand on it too much because it gets technical very, very quickly, but it goes something like this. If you take ibuprofen, the job of ibuprofen is to look at the amount of inflammation in your body and reduce it. It's a steroidal anti-inflammatory. Aspirin does it in a different way, but it works in one direction. If you take a vitamin D supplement, it's going to increase the amount of vitamin D. So most interventions, not just based on medicine, pharmacology, but most interventions work in one direction. Yoga seems to work in both directions, meaning if you have too much of something, it reduces it. If you have too little of something, it seems to increase it. And that's an odd way for any intervention to work. And there is a famous definition of yoga that in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, samatvam yoga uchyate, means the wise say that yoga is that which brings you in harmony. And that's what Swami writes about in his book, Art and Science of Raja Yoga. He says that yoga doesn't work by filling in what you don't have or decreasing what you have too much of, but it works by harmonizing all bodily systems so that the body does the job of decreasing or increasing. And Yogananda says the same thing about energization exercises. If you read carefully what he writes about it, he says energization exercises balance the 5 pranas in the body. So energization is ultimately a practice of harmony, not one of making you stronger, from a physical sense, or it's not one directional, it's bringing you back to center. So it's very exciting to be in yoga research these days because people are beginning to ask this second level of questions. They have double-clicked into yoga and expanded it and peering under the hood. And it's bearing out a lot of what Master and Swami, and of course many of the other great yogis across the centuries have written.
That was a great question, Kim, and a wonderful answer. and I want to tag onto that a little bit. Just then, in our path, being that it's path that's more on the meditative side, how do you encourage folks to, or what do you suggest in terms of a balance of maybe asana or in other forms of pranayama? We obviously got Kriya Yoga, but I'm just wondering, is energization the good, is that the I don't want to say substitute, but I'm just wondering how you approach that.
No, it's a great question, and one that I get asked often, especially because I teach a lot of Hatha Yoga. And for those of us, the devotees, Kriya Band's disciples, the answer is actually very straightforward. It's energization twice a day and Mahamudra. That combination is Master's written multiple times that's enough. And in fact, energization is the distilled essence of all yogic practices. Twice a day, practice the way he writes, tense with will, relax and feel. And Mahamudra is very important. It's in fact, when I was growing up in India, I've been practicing yoga since I was 8 years old. Nobody taught Mahamudra properly. It was always a mysterious practice. We all knew that it's one of these esoteric, extraordinarily effective practice, but they just didn't teach it. And the first thing that caught my eye when I came onto Ananda and became a disciple of Master was, wow, they're teaching Mahamudra now. I just cannot tell you what a big deal it is, what an extraordinary practice it is. So we got all the yogic practices that have beneficial health effects. Masters really taken it in form and given it to us. There's really nothing necessary beyond that, other than in specific therapeutic situations. There might be some intervention of other yoga or medicine or anything, but to keep things going, that's enough. The other part asked is, what is the place of all of these pranayamas? The guidance that Master and Swami gave is very simple. They said that a little bit of pranayama in the beginning, things like alternate nostril breathing, Sitkari pranayama, Kapalabhati, just maybe 5 minutes or so, is more than enough. You don't need, if you go to an ashram in India, do practice yoga traditionally, they teach you 20, 30 minutes of pranayama. In fact, I teach that sometimes for some of our advanced pranayama classes, just to give people a sense of what it is, but it's not necessary because our pranayama is kriya, and it has within it not just the essence of all other pranayamas, but it takes it 10 steps forward. And the other practices that come with kriya, they have, that's all the yoga that we need, no more.
Wonderful, thank you. Just another little addition to that question, then we do have some questions in the chat too. So you say Mahamudra, and you know, a lot of people, well, I don't know a lot of people, but some people as they're getting older, especially cannot do it in its, you know, purest form, and there's modifications. Do you feel, I don't know, that those are good enough, I guess is the question? A good substitute for the traditional?
Absolutely. Any of the modifications, and you know, the simplest one is on the chair. They are all equally good. You know why? The effectiveness of Mahamudra, I mean, I don't want to reveal the technique, but I can speak about it in general terms, comes from the fact that it's a spinal stretch. And any of the modifications incorporates the spinal stretch in its deepest form. None of them shortchange it. So the answer is yes, they all work equally well. So when with all of these techniques, it's a good thing to remember that even a little bit of practice, and then let the body guide us beyond that.
Wonderful, thank you so much. We do have a few questions and comments. Babu says thanks you and says he wants to meet you often. So we'll definitely invite you back if you'll come. And then
Certainly, I'd love to meet you guys often as well.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. This has been such a joy. Supriya says, can you share with us how you made your way to the U.S. and how you found this path?
Well, not to reinforce a stereotype, but I made my way to the US because I'm into computers. I'm an Indian IT guy. How unique is that? So I came here to do my master's, and I grew up in a family that was very conversant with yoga, but not that spiritual at all. We had a very large library at home and all books on Vedanta. My brothers were storytellers, and I grew up with those. But never read autobiography of a yogi, never thought of that. I was very scientific. I really didn't think too much about the teachings of Sanatana Dharma. And then when I came here, just after a while, I was practicing and actually teaching martial arts. There's a Taekwondo-based practice that I used to teach. And the founder of that had come over to Seattle, and we had to establish, we wanted to create a display of his books So I went to East West Bookstore, which is a bookstore owned by Ananda over here. There's one more in Palo Alto. And I went and I talked to Susan, who was running it at that time, and said, would you please create a display? And they said, of course we will. And then I thought these were such nice people. I was really struck by how nice they were. And then I had this thought that, well, I should explore my heritage, that I really want to practice. You know, I've done martial arts for a while. Let me practice the Indian style meditation. And so I was asking them, and they said, oh, our temple is right opposite. Just go on there, and there's a how to meditate class. And I walked in and I saw the altar, and I saw the picture of Lahiri Mahashai there. And there was this instant sense of familiarity. I couldn't, in my muddled up mind, I thought he looked like one of my maternal uncles. So I called up my mom and said, I just saw this photo of one of the great yogis, and doesn't he look like this guy? And I showed her the photo, and she said, you're deluded. He looks absolutely nothing like that. But it, you know, it's funny how this ancient memories work. I just could not shake that sense of familiarity. And quite literally, that's what brought me on the path. I just wanted to go back. And I did a how to meditate class, and 20 years later, here I am. And a month into that, I read Autobiography of a Yogi, couldn't put it down, read it again, couldn't put it down, and keep doing it. And so that's my story. That's how I got on the path. Not in India, ironically. I had to come all across the Atlantic, come over to the West Coast, and then read the book that I know was there on my family's bookshelf for as long as I've been alive.
Wow, that's a wonderful story. It's always great to hear people's stories of how they came on the path. That's a very good one, though. I love it. Thank you for sharing. So, well, it is 12:30. I don't know if there's any other questions.
I have another question. If it won't take too long. I think you said that Master talked about energization, balancing the 5 pranas. Is that what you said? Can you go into a little more detail on that? Because I've never heard of, more than prana as just a general term.
Okay. Well, the cosmic vibration that I talked about, the vibration of Om, that when it comes into the individual human body, we call it prana. So the Holy Ghost coming into the human body through the medulla, the mouth of God, becomes prana. And that prana sustains all of our activities. And it splits into 5. If you think about our existence, our physiology, there is the energy of digestion, that we take in something from the outside and we cook it into a usable form. When we do that for food, it's called digestion, but you can see the same thing applies to thoughts. You hear me and you cook it in your mind through the lens of your experience in a usable form for you. That too is digestion. So that is one energy. It's called samana. Then what's the next energy after that? Whatever has been cooked needs to be assimilated. That's the energy of assimilation. That's called udana. And samana is centered here in the belly button. Udana is centered here in the throat. Then what do you need to do? Whether it's physiology or psychology, it needs to be circulated. It needs to be sent to distant parts of our being. So that's the energy of circulation. It's called jnana. And that is, yogis say, that's what is perceived as the aura around us. But that's still not enough. Whatever we ingest, not all of it is usable. Some of it is toxic for us. So that needs to be eliminated. So you have the energy of elimination. That's called apana. It's centered lower down in the chakras. And then finally, this thing needs to be choreographed. In other words, you cannot eliminate before you assimilate or before you digest. You see what I'm saying? They need to happen. There is somebody that needs to impose harmony on these elemental processes, and that's centered in the heart. That's simply called as prana. And what energization does, now I've explained this, what I've explained is esoteric yogic theory. And what energization does is balances all of that. So for example, if we have too much elimination energy or too little, or too much digestion energy or too little, you see what I'm saying? So it quite literally balances these 5 archetypal processes in physiology and psychology. Now that's, isn't that thrilling the way that works?
I feel like you could spend a lifetime just studying that much right there.
Yeah, and if you are interested, there is where you can read many sources. Master writes about this all over the place, but Swami explains this very well in this book called Art and Science of Raja Yoga. So just look at the 5 energies, and the explanation I just gave comes from that.
In the Raja Yoga text, is that
where in the Raja Yoga text? Because I'm not thinking.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing that.
I believe it is in either in step 6 or steps 12 or 13, one of those 2.
Okay.
I have to ask this question because it reminded me of it. We've asked, or we've explored this, tried to explore it or explain it in class, and we don't quite understand it. And I think you may have the answer. Master says that energy enters the body through the medulla, and we know that there's the up and down flows. What happens when it enters? Where does it go immediately? Does it go down the spine and then up the spine? Or, you know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to understand that a little bit better.
Well,
in terms of prana,
it's best to understand that from the perspective of what happens at birth and death, because that's the T = 0 and T = omega for us. Everything else in the middle is simple circulation. It goes up and comes down. So the question is what happens at birth and death. So the way Yogananda explained this is, he said that when the baby comes out at birth, the energy that comes through the medulla, because it has assumed the egoic form, this is true even for an avatar, because it has assumed the egoic form, the pull downward is what begins the process of inhabiting this body. So the energy moves downward. Downwards associated with what? Exhalation. What do babies do as soon as they come in? They cry out. It's exhalation. You see what I'm saying? So energy comes down. With the exhalation, we begin the duality of life. Similarly, at death, what happens? We've exhausted the energy, and the energy has come down, and we want to take the next inhalation, but it's time for us to leave. So there is the next failed inhalation that results in death. Energy comes down, and the body that's how people die. Right? Everything in between, the energy circulates up and down. However, which is the real essence of the question is, as yogis, we magnetize the opposite pole of the medulla. It's the negative pole, the positive pole. We magnetize that so that when energy comes into the medulla, instead of being pulled down by ignorance, by kundalini, by maya, whatever you want to call it, Satan, it's magnetized up by Christ consciousness. So instead of going down, it goes up. And the more we are able to do, what happens in deep meditation? We become breathless, don't we? So at least for that duration, the energy is traversing the reverse path. From medulla, instead of going down, it's coming up. Hong Saw practice, that's what happens. We keep watching the breath. eventually the energy comes here and we become breathless for a duration. So that's how all of those concepts fit together.
So when we do energization and we're talking about drawing in the energy, right, through the medulla, we think of just magnetizing it here. Is that correct to say that? I mean, I'm thinking of trying the visualization of the energy, and energization in particular.
So the way we do is if you want to bring the energy up, you need to first bring it in from where it's spread out. And energy is stuck in various places. So what you have to do is first release that stuck energy and then bring it up. These are the 3 stages: detoxification, inward, and upward. So the process of energization is when you tense with will and relax and feel, you're detoxifying, you're releasing, and then every time you relax and feel, you're drawing it inward. But the whole process is guided by our consciousness being here, so that eventually at the end of energization, it comes upward. When we do this, we are moving with energy, it comes upward. So the way to do energization is focus at the spiritual eye, follow the energy from the medulla to the body part. And when you feel, the energy comes upward. So it's the basic guidelines master set is really the visualization. Is because it's a pranayama practice.